Friday show. We're at the end of a long week. We always take a little bit of a break, try a new bourbon, and meet somebody interesting from the St. Louis startup scene. So thank you for joining us. We did take a 2-week break, and we wanted to kick things off again with a very exciting guest. So today we have the executive director of Arch Grants herself, and that's Emily Lohse-Busch. So thank you for joining us, Emily.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So I think the first thing we want to go over is obviously just tell us what Arch Grants is.
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit organization based here in T-Rex, and our primary goal is to build the future economy of St. Louis from the ground up through the power of entrepreneurship.
Wow.
So the way that we do that is every year we host a global startup competition where we get hundreds and hundreds of applications from around the world. We narrow that down through a number of steps and about 400 judges from around the city to our finalists, and we bring those finalists into live pitch in front of our competition committee, and then from there we choose our final 20 who receive the Arch Grants, and each of them receives a $50,000 non-dilutive equity-free grant.
Okay.
And what we ask of them is to be in St. Louis for a period of at least 1 year, and we meet with them regularly. We connect them into the community. Our goal at that point is how do we build their investment in St. Louis to the point where it makes more sense for them to stay than go.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Quite a few details. I like it. It's a great
only
description.
that. Yeah.
So the first thing I want to ask you about is kind of that initial mission where you're talking about building the economy from the ground up.
Yeah.
Which is a huge mission, obviously, right?
So
where did that idea come from, right? So how did Arch Grants kind of get started in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So we started about 6 years ago, almost 7 at this point. We have 4 founders: Jerry Schlichter, Bob Guller, Zach Boyers, and Joe Schlafly.
Okay.
And the way that they came up with this idea was really through the lens of they're all huge St. Louis boosters, downtown people.
Sure.
Been here for a long time and have seen the trend that's happening in St. Louis and honestly in cities around the country of companies leaving, companies merging, kind of a trend toward, particularly in St. Louis, people leaving downtown and moving out to the suburbs and different areas. And saw this and instead of kind of looking at the big overarching ways of economic development, how do you continue to grow a city, when they saw this decline, said, what can we do to quickly, efficiently, effectively kind of jumpstart or catalyze a movement in the opposite direction. Okay. So they started Arch Grants to do exactly that. And the idea from the beginning was, we're not going to do this unless we can move the needle. Sure. So if we can only give out 1 or 2 or 3 $50,000 grants, we're not going to do it, because then at that point, like, are we really? We need shots on goal to have success.
Sure.
So even in that first year, they awarded 15 grants, so $750,000, and then found that this has never been tried before. This nonprofit model of doing these non-dilutive grants had never been tried. So they had an idea and a hope that it would work, but they weren't really sure. And then after that first year, starting to see that a lot of the companies stayed and grew, and then they tried it again the second year. They did 20 the second year, and saw that this was really starting to take hold. And that's when it really started to become a movement, is the best way I can describe it.
Absolutely.
I mean, at this point, we funded 114 companies.
Wow.
97 of them are still in business, and
really? Okay.
Of those, about 88% are still here in St. Louis.
88?
So, which is
That's
pretty
amazing.
insane.
Yeah.
I mean, and about 50% of the companies we fund are what we call attract, meaning they weren't in St. Louis and they came for an Arch Grant, and then 50% are retain, which means that they're companies that were already here, but potentially may feel that they needed to leave for one reason or another, because of funding, because of whatever it may be. And so we use the Arch Grant in that situation to help retain them for another year and get them more invested, get them to have more connection with the community, so they're less likely to leave. Yeah,
so it sounds like that 1 year period even has been super effective in getting people to stay here. What do you think happens? I mean, obviously there's the $50,000, which is nice.
Never hurts. Yeah.
That doesn't. Nobody's gonna complain about that. But what else is Arch Grants doing to help these companies, stick around?
Yeah.
Because I remember that used to not happen, right? Like
Absolutely.
10 years ago, most companies were leaving very early.
And absolutely. I mean, and there's some great examples of that, of huge companies that started here but felt like to grow they needed to go elsewhere.
Sure.
So honestly, for us, our program team, their work, I always say their work really starts once the competition's over.
Okay.
Once the 20 companies have received the Arch Grants, have come here, have started the Arch Grants program, which I use air quotes because it's not a formal mentorship program. It's not a formal, we meet every month and we go over marketing or finances or whatever it is. Our program is very much geared toward the specific needs of the entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And the fact that our companies, we're industry agnostic, and they're in all different stages of growth. So
Sure.
what we do is it's a very customized approach. And this has, I would say, evolved over the years in that we meet with them at least quarterly, some of them much more often than that, and just ask the question, what do you need? Who do you need to be connected to? Where are you struggling? Where is the pipeline? Where are you having a problem with talent development or cash flow or whatever it may be? And then we put our heads together after each one of those meetings and immediately just make the connections that need to be made.
Really? Okay.
And then in addition to that, they receive pro bono legal support, pro bono accounting support, pro bono marketing support. So the idea is that it's very intentional from the time they get here to the end of that year that we're showing them everything St. Louis has to offer and then hoping that the case that we can make is enough to keep them here.
All right, so it's a lot about connecting them to the right people, the right organizations, that sort of stuff as well.
Absolutely. For follow-on, for customers, for talent. Those are probably the three main things.
Okay. Now, is there, I know if you go through more of an accelerator, there's also the kind of this big accountability piece, and, and metrics and things like that. Are you also pushing them in that sense? It sounds like it's more of a support role.
Yeah, it's
maybe,
interesting.
Right?
So it's very much by design that we don't do that.
Okay.
And because, and it serves a really important role for accelerators to do something like that. But for us, it's also the reason that we don't take equity, honestly, is that it allows us to approach and interact with the companies from a different perspective. So when you think of somebody who takes an equity position in your company, you're automatically incentivized to kind of put on your best face. I mean, these are people who have invested in you and need you to succeed because it also impacts them. For us, the grant is we're betting on the founders.
Okay.
And so for us, what we want to make sure the founders feel comfortable in doing is saying, like, listen, I'm really struggling this month. I just feel like my heart's not in it, or I need to pivot and I don't know how. Like, to really be able to bring to us what is holding them back, and then we can, that's where we feel like we can have the best potential to help. So we don't do a lot of, we measure things. We measure the revenue that they've generated, the follow-on capital that they've raised, the jobs they create, all those types of things. But we do that, and we do it twice a year. And we do it very much as a reporting mechanism, not as a, if you don't hit this, you're not going to get the money.
Gotcha.
Once you become a recipient, as long as you're here and your company is in business, you get the $50,000.
You get your 50 grand. All right. Cool. I like the sound of that. That's great. So more of a counselor role, it almost sounds like.
Exactly. And a partner. Honestly, that's how we see it. And a lot of our companies go into accelerators or go into incubators and do, and that it's people ask that all the time, is that is that ever hard? Is it getting too crowded? And for Arch Grants, it actually, it's I don't see a time where it ever gets too crowded, because we are not, it's not an either or. We push people into different accelerators around the community, and honestly, we get a lot of our recipients that have gone through one of them. So it's really
kind of feed
a
into each other that way. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about numbers, right? So I know you guys just put out your yearly report. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So tell us, obviously, the retention. I mean, the initial objective of supporting St. Louis companies and retaining them. You've obviously achieved that goal.
Yeah.
And all kinds of success there. So tell us about some of these companies and like overall numbers. Are they getting a lot of follow-on investment?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
No, it's a really good question. And honestly, our report that came out was as of December 31st, 2017.
Okay.
So it's got some great numbers, but even since then, and I don't think I've said these publicly yet, so this is
exclusive.
This is exclusive.
Exclusive.
Yeah.
I like it.
We just collected again in April, and our numbers are looking really incredible. So the end of 2017, we reported in follow-on capital about 130 million, and 6 months later, as we've collected again, we're up to 173 million that our company. So it's a 44% growth in that area, which is awesome. And that number honestly has been growing at a really steady, really exciting tick since the beginning. Our companies have been doing and it's not. People always ask me this, especially this year. It's not just 1 or 2 or 3 companies raising a lot of money.
Okay, I was going to ask you, the big rounds, or
we've always had a couple of those, which are great. We love those, but particularly in the last year or so, it's been a lot of companies raising modest but good amounts of money, $2 million.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. So it's going to spread around a little bit better that way. Yeah.
Right. And then I would say even the more exciting news, and this is as we put on our economic development hats, which is primarily what we are, is that our companies, as of our last data collection, have now generated over $135 million in revenue.
Oh, really?
And that number was about $89 million just 6 months ago. And so what we're starting to see, which is exactly what you want to see with any individual startup, which is that revenue will grow while products being developed, while beta testing, all those types of things are happening, and then it starts to kind of hockey stick, right?
Sure. Yep.
And that's what we're excited to see is starting to happen now. And that's ultimately what's going to do what we're trying to do, which is build the economy from the ground up.
Yeah, right.
When revenue starts being generated.
Yeah, and I think that's something you see a lot in the startup world, where funding gets all this attention.
Absolutely.
And I'm always like, that's always my question. Is I'm like, how much money does the company make?
Right.
You know, great, they have a couple $100 million. That's exciting. Like, are they making that much money? Right. So,
or are people investing in, and that, it's hard because a lot of times startups, as you know, especially in the bioscience space, you know, it may be 5-10 years before a product actually goes to market.
Yep.
But we've been patient for the last several years, and we have some bioscience companies, but not a whole lot. But we're starting to see products be released to market, products growing into different markets. We've got several companies that aren't taking on follow-on capital anymore, that are just growing organically now, which is
great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Those are my favorite kind, you know, self-funded at a certain point. You don't need to keep raising money, right?
Yeah.
So tell us, let's get into a couple specifics, maybe some case studies, so to speak. So are there some companies you can tell us that have been a part of Arch Grants and kind of, you know, what's happened after they graduated?
Yeah, and that's always such a hard question, because every time I give the answer to this, is when I leave, there's like 5 others, and I'm like, I should have talked about them. One of the ones I think we're so excited about right now is Less Annoying CRM. Have they been on this show?
I haven't yet.
Okay.
We're in discussions, you could say, maybe.
So that's one that won an Arch Grant several years ago. Have actually been growing organically from the beginning. Never took any follow-on. It was 5 WashU grads that were all around the country, came to St. Louis for the Arch Grant.
Great. Yeah.
And are just doing incredible things, not only in the sense that their business is growing, and I think they just surpassed $2 million in revenue.
That's amazing.
Had their first conference here at T-Rex. But then in addition to that, they're looking for ways to reinvest into the community. So they, from the business side, they are now leasing, I think, a 9,000 square foot office space on Olive, just downtown.
Wow.
They've got 17, 18 full-time employees, but then they're also working with some of the local school districts to develop intern programs for coders, and are looking at teaching curriculum. I mean, they're doing so much in different areas of St. Louis because by being here, they've opted in every sense of the word.
Sure.
And that's, if you think about what we invest in with Arch Grants, we literally invest in companies, but what we're actually doing is investing in the potential and the vision of founders.
Sure. Okay.
And so we always keep that lens on, is who do we think gets the movement we're building here, gets what it looks like for St. Louis to move into the future in a way that's hopeful, that's positive, and that's generating real growth.
Sure.
And I think that sometimes takes people who think differently, and that's what our entrepreneurs are.
So is that something that you're searching for when you're considering companies, or do you kind of breed that in the program?
I would say the nature of the companies that we fund and the founders that we fund, they tend to be of that mind, because if you're a person who founds a company, and particularly a company that we like to fund, which it means that it's innovative and it's scalable and it's meant to be big and far-reaching, you've seen a problem in your life, in your industry, whatever it may be, and instead of accepting that or complaining or seeing it as a barrier, you've just decided to do it another way.
Yeah.
And so what we encourage all of our founders to do is take that same mentality and think about it with the landscape of St. Louis.
Okay.
So a lot of the barriers, a lot of the challenges that we see in this community, which are real and are things that we have to address, there's ways to do that. And we love the idea that our recipients are engaging with the community and bringing that same kind of disruptive mindset to St. Louis.
Yeah, and St. Louis has plenty of problems to work on fixing, right?
It does, and honestly, every community, I mean, every community does,
sure.
but
We get a lot more attention, I guess, around here for some of them than other cities
and in
would,
some
maybe,
ways, you know, we bring a lot more attention on it. I mean,
sure.
from ourselves, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I think it's, I think it's, what I want to make sure that we're doing is being solution oriented, and that's what what our recipients are. So yes, we have barriers and we have challenges that are unique to St. Louis, honestly. But the fact that we're in the spotlight for so many of these things means that we can be a leader in the solution.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
So I think for the people that are watching, the question I would have at this point is like, all right, how do I get an arch grant? Like, how do I apply? What's the process look like? I think at this point you said you're getting close to, or the finalists for this round have been selected, right?
Yes.
So they're coming to town
for
soon?
2018. Yeah. So we, in mid-August, we're bringing 50 finalists. This is the biggest class, or the biggest cohort we've ever brought to do our live pitches.
Wow, okay.
So there'll be 50 of them coming to town mid-August. And then they'll be selected by our judges and announced at our gala in November.
Okay.
But and at this point, we're still planning on for 2019, which is the next time you can apply, doing one cohort. So in the past, sometimes we've done two or three. Right.
Yeah, okay.
Never more than 20, but we've split it up differently.
Sure.
We're planning on doing one cohort again, and applications will probably open around February.
Okay.
And that then go through the same cycle where we'll award in November.
And it's basically just an online application to start the process?
It is,
And then there's obviously other steps. But
it is, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so if somebody wants to register, just go to archgrants.org.
It is.
Right, because nonprofit. All right.
Archgrants.org.
Cool. I love it. All right. Well, we got a few more minutes. We're going to bring Eric onto the show now, the Bourbon father himself, the original founder of our Bourbon Friday event. So to have Eric, and I'm sorry, I have the bottle over on the table this week. I don't know if you need the prop or not, but tell us what we're drinking on this week.
Sure. So we're drinking Baker's Kentucky Straight Bourbon. It's from Jim Beam. And when I was trying to connect Arch Grants to bourbon, it was a little bit more challenging. But then as I dug deeper in, I found out that Arch Grants really came about in 2011. Right?
True. Yes.
That went in the barrel in 2011. So that is a 7-year-old bourbon.
Nice.
There you go.
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. And on a personal note, like all of my closest friends are from Arch Grants. So thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing all of Eric's friends.
That's what we're here for.
Jonathan likes to joke that I'm the hidden feature of Arch Grants.
You're the hidden beneficiary, is what I'm hearing.
That is true.
Yeah.
That
yeah.
is true.
You have to put them in your brochures and all your
and you get to be friends with this guy.
True. and the 10 Bourbon Friday and all the subsequent benefits of that.
And he knows a lot about bourbon.
So actually, I'm glad you brought up less annoying CRM because it leads really well into kind of the last topic I want to discuss today. And that was basically, there's all these cities that are trying to do this thing of creating the startup community right now. And I work with a lot of small businesses that are from the county or even St. Charles County. And there's just not a ton of awareness there of what's going on.
Yeah.
So, less annoying CRM is, in my opinion, a great kind of first step. One of the ways people can get involved in the startup scene is just using the product, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a product that's literally made for small businesses.
Yeah.
And the name kind of explains, the appeal of it.
Exactly what it is.
So what else? I mean, other than, and obviously maybe giving us some examples of companies that you guys know of that we could be using, right, as a way of supporting them. But what else can the typical kind of St. Louis overall citizen do to help this community grow?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. And one of the things that I think we've identified is that what's so interesting is there's been such huge growth in the startup ecosystem in St. Louis, which is incredible. And it's the reason why we can say things like 88% of our companies are still here, because funders aren't as inclined to make them leave right away to fund them, because they see that there's a support system here. That being said, I do think there's still a disconnect between what's known as the startup ecosystem and St. Louis as a whole.
Sure.
In a lot of ways, we actually see ourselves as a bridge to be able to do that, because while we engage primarily with the startup ecosystem, our goal, our primary customer or client, as it would be, is St. Louis.
Sure.
And so what I always encourage people to think about is a startup is, I mean, if you really think of the essence of what it is, it's a little business that will get bigger.
Sure.
And so all of us need to look at what's happening in the startup ecosystem and use products, but then it's also just making connections for executives at St. Louis companies to think about how they can use some local St. Louis businesses for, I mean, a lot of our past recipients are online HR function or like Less Annoying CRM, which is a customer relationship manager. We've got EQ, which is a great example. Well, Long Neck and Thunderfoot was the recipient, then purchased EQ. That's doing that work. I think what we're seeing more and more, and then a lot of our companies, particularly in the healthcare space, obviously having the huge healthcare systems here in St. Louis as pilots, as mentors, as to be able to engage with the companies, whether it's on a customer basis or on just a mentorship level, is a huge way to get involved. And then the other thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention, is just to have anybody who wants to get involved in this space to reach out to me, to anybody here, come down to T-Rex, go to Cortex.
Of course, yeah.
Just engage every time, even my family, and my family's out in Chesterfield. Every time they come down to our gala or to anything down here, are always shocked at what's happening.
I see that too. Yeah.
Going back, it's the reason that I ultimately moved back here. I grew up here. I was gone for a number of years and came back a few years ago, and it was the energy and the potential that exists kind of from Cortex East that I got so excited about, and I think that's contagious.
It is, yeah.
But people need to come.
Yeah.
So
I've had a lot of people that, they're almost initially they're afraid to come to the city. Like, I don't want to drive downtown, and they got their reasons. And they'll come here once, and then they always want to meet here, which is convenient for me because I don't have to drive way the heck out into the county, right?
It's true.
So, Eric, what have you seen? I mean, you've been here for a while. I mean, what has changed in St. Louis since you got here?
Oh, wow.
You seeing some of the same sort of stuff as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, definitely downtown is been very much Wash Ave has been revitalized. When I first moved down here, it was a lot of empty buildings, and now practically everything up the street is filled, and it's expanding out. And you've got Ballpark Village and all of that, and then certainly like this community of entrepreneurs just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and like driving this economy.
Mm-hmm. When did you move here?
I moved here 20 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're downtown?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was when I left. It was like 2004, around then, and so the difference is it's really striking.
Yeah, it's
and
awesome.
Exciting. Yeah.
Well, so I think that leads into a nice plug for next week, right? Because we're having a bigger Bourbon Friday than normal. So you want to tell us what we're doing next week?
Sure. So next week we're doing an event. It's called Innovate Giving. You can go and register at innovategiving.org, and kind of the idea is to connect entrepreneurs, the nonprofit community, and the government, local government, to try and address some of these bigger problems, and start that conversation and showcase those things. And so we'll be showcasing some social entrepreneurs. We'll be showcasing some of the nonprofits in the area, and we have people from the government on the panel as well.
Cool. So I think maybe the easiest way to handle this is if you are watching this, we'll go ahead and put a link for that event in the comments, right?
Yep.
So just make sure you RSVP on Facebook so we can have an expectation. I think Marriott is actually sponsoring it for us. So good. So anybody is welcome to that. So I know a lot of times we do like kind of invite only at Bourbon Friday, but this one's pretty much open to the public, right?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time. I'm getting the sign here, so I got to wrap things up. I do want to thank Eric and Emily for joining us today. Thanks for being on the show.
Anytime.
As always, we do want to invite you to RSVP for Bourbon Friday. Normally, you want to send us a message, and we'll get you an invite. Obviously, next week, you just need to RSVP on the Facebook page. My name's Nick. I'm the host. We have Vanessa is our producer on the show with Connects Marketing. I'd like to thank T-Rex for hosting us and EQ for streaming us. And thanks for tuning in. Obviously, every Friday at 4:30, check us out on the EQ Facebook page. Thank you.